Jedi Fallen Order. Now, before I get started, I wanted to give like a quick spoiler alert, I guess. I mean, I'm only showing like 3 or 4 planets in worth of gameplay, and I'm only going to be talking about the story a little bit, but just in case you want to go in blind, which I don't know why you'd be watching a video review, but in case you want to go in blind, just stop watching now. And yeah, for everyone else, well, welcome to the review, I suppose. Now, Jedi Fallen Order came out last Friday, and I've been addicted to it, kind of. I picked it up at launch because, well, it's a Star Wars product, and that's my religion. And as I was standing in line to purchase this, I decided to look up the Metacritic score, which I don't typically do for games that I intend to review, just because I don't appreciate being skewed with a negative bias. However, I was delighted to see that pretty much everyone on this planet has given this game at least a 7 out of 10, if not higher. And after playing for about 10 hours, I'm ready to give my opinion as well. Now, do I agree with all of the positive reviews? Both yes and no. Allow me to get into it. I suppose we should start with the story because that's pretty important in this kind of game. Jedi Fallen Order's story, in my opinion, is one of the weaker points. It's pretty bland. You play as a Jedi named Cal who is forcibly forced to quit his job in a 9-to-5 shipyard, and he is joined by Sare and Grease on a ship called the Mantis, and you basically have to fly around to rebuild the Jedi Order. Now, I don't doubt that a lot of you Star Wars Bible thumpers who are into the expanded universe will find this very interesting. However, as someone who loves the franchise to death and doesn't read a lot into Legends, I couldn't really find myself being too captured by this. I don't know why they decided to go with a more methodical religion-based Star Wars story for this as opposed to a more action-oriented one, but here we are. So I personally found the story to be a little lackluster. However, I'm willing to admit that the gameplay does make up for it for the most part. The gameplay is split into 2 different sections, exploration and combat. The exploration is painful at its worst and decent at its best. The combat, however, in my opinion, the combat is the best it's ever been in a Star Wars game. When you attack characters, you really do feel each and every move, you feel each and every attack. You're not just blatantly swinging a lightsaber around, you do have to plan and strategize a little bit, and I can definitely tell that this was influenced by Dark Souls because there's a lot of backwards rolling in order to avoid timed attacks. You unlock force powers to move things in the exploration areas, and you can use those in combat, such as pushing, pulling, etc. I really think the combat in this game is just phenomenal, and in my opinion, it's the best combat ever in a Star Wars video game. You really feel like you're playing a movie during these sections. There is a plethora of characters to fight, everything from stormtroopers like you would expect to the nature and fauna, and overall, like I've said previously, the combat is the high point of this game. In my opinion, if you are to buy Jedi Fallen Order for any reason, it would be for the combat. The exploration, on the other hand, in terms of gameplay, it's not great all the time. There's a lot of sections where you just sort of wander around from point A to point B, and whenever you have to return to a planet after you've already left, you always have to go to an objective at the opposite end of the planet. And although there are climbing sections in the vein of Assassin's Creed, and there are cool combat sections to spice things up, it really does get boring quick. I really wish there were more mini-bosses and more variety because a lot of the planets you'll be exploring are very woodland-typed, grass-filled areas, and although there are underground sections and caves, a lot of it looks the same and it just makes you bored. If I wanted to play a game where I raid tombs, I'd probably play Tomb Raider and not Star Wars. Both the absolute best and absolute worst things about the exploration parts of this game are the force abilities. When I'm exploring a tomb and it has a crack in the wall and I get to force push to create a hole and explore more of the tomb, that's pretty cool. However, when I'm solving an obnoxious ball puzzle like the ones on Zepho, it makes me want to shoot myself. If you got annoyed with the ball puzzles in Breath of the Wild, then you have not seen anything yet, and it always pains me when I see boring puzzles in a good exploration game, because Jedi Fallen Order has atmosphere in spades and also has tons of little optional goodies to go for, but it's pretty linear when you're just walking around the land going from point A to point B. Now, if you're like me and you like a little bit more linearity, there are a couple pretty linear missions. For example, there's one where you hijack an AT-AT, and it's amazing. I'm actually not going to show any gameplay because if you you do plan on buying the game, I want this to be a surprise for you. I'm not exaggerating when I say it's the most memorable part of the game, and I wish the game had more moments like this in it. There's also a few moments in this game where you have the opportunity to sneak up on bad guys like stormtroopers in order to eliminate them without causing a scene and alerting anyone else. However, stealth is not really an element in Fallen Order, at least not that I can tell, and that's a huge shame, because if I could just like sneak up behind stormtroopers and impale them, or sneak up and snap their necks and keep going without alerting everyone else in the vein of Metal Gear, that would have made a huge difference, and in my opinion, it would have made some of the combat and exploration a little bit more interesting to me. And the final thing I'll say about the gameplay is that the controls take a little bit of time getting used to. It's not as fluent as a game like Breath of the Wild or Assassin's Creed. The controls are a little strange when it comes to climbing things, and also when it comes to descending or walking across pipes. I would have preferred if they mirrored a little bit more of a conventional control style as opposed to doing their own thing, although it does work and you can get used to it. It's a little cumbersome at first. I also find it kind of weird that it's not the same control scheme as Battlefront 2, which is a game that EA publishes, but whatever. Let's talk about the presentation and sound design, because those are two things that this game does exceptionally well. The sound design is wonderful, the music is nice and atmospheric, although there's nothing too memorable. It does 100% sound like Star Wars music though, and it gets you in the mood to watch the movies, so it does the job perfectly. The graphics are great and they look phenomenal. They don't look quite as good as the Battlefront games with the Frostbite engine, but Unreal Engine does a pretty comparable job and it makes the game look pretty close to the movies. The character models all look phenomenal and the humans look like real humans. It's funny how any modern Star Wars game, despite how technically flawed they might be, the graphics will always excel, and that just makes me happy. In terms of performance, the game does have a couple issues. I played it on the PlayStation 4 and the game is capped to 30 FPS but drops significantly in heavily wooded areas. I don't know if that's being patched, but it's just something that I've noticed. At times in Kashyyyk, the frame rate dipped into single digits and it was very noticeable. The loading screens are also a little bit of a problem. I've timed a couple of them to be upwards of a minute, which is sort of a big deal considering the fact that most games nowadays load in and load out pretty quickly. And lastly, while we're on the topic of performance, I've encountered tons of bugs. There's a couple just graphical ones that I found to be very interesting, but there were about 2 or 3 times where the game pretty much broke just due to glitches, and the game also crashed on me a fair amount towards the end, which that's not great. I don't know if it's just the PS4 version, I don't know if the PS4 Pro doesn't have these problems, or if the Xbox One or Xbox One X version has these problems. I don't know if the PC has these problems. I'm just letting you guys know that I played it on the base PS4, the launch unit. These things need to be fixed, guys. This isn't really acceptable for a finished game nowadays. So overall, would I recommend Jedi Fallen Order? Certainly not at the $60 price point, unless you're a huge Star Wars nerd like me, and in that case you probably already bought it. The gameplay at its best is great, but at its worst is it's just so boring to play through. The story doesn't really grab me, although I'll admit that's subjective, it might grab you. But the cherry on top was the fact that it kept crashing and there were tons of bugs. I honestly don't think it's acceptable to release a game that's this clunky in 2019 when we live in an age where you can patch the crap out of games after they're released. It just proves to me that EA shit this game out without really thinking too much about it. And the fact that it's getting positive reviews despite the fact that there are some huge performance issues and some huge gameplay issues, it makes me a little worrisome. I will admit that there are a lot of parts about this game that I thoroughly enjoyed, but I think you should wait for a price drop. Unless you have EA Access and you can get it for 10 or 15% off. But for anyone else, I'm sure it'll go on sale during Black Friday, and if you really want to play a new Star Wars game, then I would pick it up during then if you can get it for a little cheaper. At $60, it does have a pretty long story and some great combat, but the exploration being boring and the glitches, that just takes it away from me. If I was giving this game a numbered score for a review, I'd probably give it a 6 or a 7. It's just a little too far away from being a great game. If the exploration sessions were a little bit shorter and they peppered in more mini-bosses, I could see this bumping up to an 8 or a 9. And of course patching the glitches, which I'm sure EA intends to do in the future. Maybe I'll revisit this game and love it in a couple years, but as it stands right now, I didn't love Jedi Fallen Order. I enjoyed my time with it overall, but there were a lot of issues. On the bright side, I hope that game devs can learn from these issues and make an even better Star Wars game next time. This has been DanRock. I hope to see you guys next time. Peace out and take care.